joining us for our National Whistleblower Day celebration. We are so eager to hear about you and your environmental defender life and all the wonderful thing you're doing. So maybe if you start with a brief description of your experiences, what do you want the audience to know about who you are? We've published quite a bit about you, the awards you've won, and you know, we met at Northeastern University. You're an incredible scholar, activist, all of the wonderful titles you have, attorney. You're working at Northeastern now. You have a great clinic. You're working at Yale. So please share your story.
I'm all yours. Let me know how I can be useful to this process. That's why I came.
So tell about what happened. Like, talk about the fraud that you uncovered. How did you find out about these contracts? How did you find out what was going on? How did you realize it was time to take action?
So are we on now?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. And I can't believe it. You allowed me to pick up my legs and show it to the folks.
Yeah, you did.
Serious, you want me? I just started where we were in the rotating room before we get to the real place. Okay, seriously. So let's start. Go ahead. What's the question, Siri? You're muted.
Oh, tell your story. Tell us how it started.
Well,
what happened?
So first and foremost, I just want to thank Siri and the National Whistleblower and all of the folks who put together this incredible program. And we invited me to be able to share my work, to learn from you, and so that collectively we are building solidarity action to respond to this process. So, I'm from Liberia. I'm sure you might notice my accent, West Africa, and I currently live in, temporary exile in the United States, not on my own will because of the nature of the work. This is what whistleblowers face. You blow the whistle on something happening, terrible things happening in our part of the world. And maybe here in the US, there is due process, but for us sometimes it's the cost for your life and the life of communities. So for the last 30 years, as a whistleblower and an activist and a defender, I have provided support to indigenous communities across most of Liberia and West Africa. And we've been involved in protecting the vast forest system. West Africa was one completely covered all by forests. And then, the mining came and the oil and gas came and the logging cartel came. And then start coming to agriculture, most of them from Southeast Asia, who are coming to clear out this forest in the home of indigenous people. And it's causing serious problem. We all know what's going on now. Just walk out of your doors and everyone talks about, wow, the heat waves. And then you look on the other side of the US, I just saw the news few days and whoa, there's massive flooding in Kentucky. Then you look further off west, and there's all these wildfires. Like, you can't believe that all of this is occurring here and there, right? So flooding, heat wave, wildfire, drought, and you can figure out what that links like to forest. So that's the relationship. So the idea was to protect this forest because forest has important features to perform, not just from a tiny country like Liberia and the indigenous people, but also for the entire globe. So I put my life to defend that and to stop these massive agricultural companies that try to destroy the forest, destroy the home of indigenous people. So we blew the whistle and we stopped them. And that made the companies angry. That made the government angry. They attempted to assassinate me. I was involved in a situation where 150 militia of the companies actually surrounded me. And they had their machetes, they had their guns. And you know what they wanted? They wanted to cannibalize me. They either wanted my heart. One said they would take my skull to drink their palm wine. And yes. And when I survived that assassination attempt, then the government sent the police and the army after me. And I was very privileged, very, very privileged, because I have friends who are abroad, who are in the United States, who are in Europe, and those friends organized and smuggled me and my family out of Liberia. And that's how I ended in the US. First at Northeastern University School of Law, where I was a visiting scholar, then end up teaching the course on human rights and environment, and then literally at Yale Law School, where I do some clinical work with students there, focusing on the sort of work I've been doing across West Africa. And this summer, I'm teaching another summer course I'm teaching back and forth. So by blowing that whistle, I was removed from my home, from my culture, from my food, from my friends, from my family, from everyone, including my own daughter, because the visa that brought me to the United States could only allow me to bring my younger kids, my oldest daughter, who was 21 by the time. It was a painful separation in Ghana. In fact, I decided that I did not want to leave because I could not make a decision as a father to decide which kids to take, which are the kids to leave. But I was forced to bring those kids here. They are here within the US now, they are doing extremely well. But that is how I got here, because I blew that whistle. So this is the sort of stuff that whistleblowers face. And most times, folks don't believe that environmental defenders, human rights defenders who are at the front line, who are responding to the climate crisis, who are upholding democracy commitments, are our first responders, are our firewall, and there's a need to pay more attention to their work, to empower them, to support them, so that they will continue blowing the whistle, so the rest of us can continue living and surviving. So this is how I got here. And it was through Northeastern that I got to meet Siri.
Yes.
Invited me for How to Get It Done as a guest speaker. And
yes, as the keynote speaker, you got everybody worked up.
Yeah, very long lasting relationship. So
but can you tell us about like how you started Green Advocates and what inspired you?
Well, it's and I'm sure you read a lot of that because there's been many versions of that written, right? There's been many interviews of my wife about how I started Green Advocate. So, I grew up in a part of Liberia I was born called Grand Cape Mount County. If you have the map of Liberia, there's a region called Grand Cape Mount, and it's a place called Rabosport. So Rabosport is this very beautiful green place. So if I say the Cape, you know what it is. So the Capes, it is actually projection to the ocean. Is this mountain? It was actually named by the earlier 14th centuries Spanish explorer who were traveling around the West African coast looking for spices and gold, those early areas. So they named this place called Cabo de Mountain, the cape that projects into the ocean. So this massive mountain. And Rabosport is beneath that hill. The indigenous Vai people don't call it Rabosport because Rabosport is named after the first president of Liberia, Joseph Jenkins Roberts. The history is that he's the descendant of ex-slaves, and that's part of the Liberian story. When they arrived, he came on the show, so they named after Rabosport. But the indigenous called the place Wa-Kolo. Wa is a mountain, and Rabosport is beneath the mountain that projects into the ocean, but they're also surrounded by a lake. So that's where I was born. And I got affected by that process because, you get up and there's the lake and there's the ocean surrounding this mountain and there's all of this stuff you can go into. So as a kid, I grew up early morning with my front doors facing the ocean front, going out and fishing and swimming and also trying to watch the migratory birds. So early on, I was not happy that my friends would set up snares to catch these birds and let them suffer. So I started to release them and I started getting bitten by my friends. So that was one part. But you don't know what you do as a young person, as a kid, how that inspires your life. You ignore that. But I just was not happy. I got bitten by my friends in that. But also, I was the earliest kid in the oldest child for my mom. And one of my household chores was to go into the mountain 2 times a week to harvest field wood, because that's how we cook our food. So, but we're trained that when you go into the mountains, you only pick up the dead wood and you bring it. And I didn't know that, that's what's preserving nature. That's what we did. So I grew up through that, went to school, graduated, studied agriculture and forestry, ended up in law school. In law school, as I studied the laws and I look at what the government was doing, it was very clear there were 2 different things. And I said, look, someone has to do something about this. So we organized grain advocates along with my friends to respond to the environmental challenges that Liberia was facing. Because if you know Liberia, we had just experienced a brutal civil war, and we had a leader who was just taking control and dominion over all the country's natural resources. He had invited kind of businesses who were clear cutting the forest. And I was in law school during that era in the 1990s. So Green was organized to respond to that. So we begin to document the illegal activities in the forestry sector. That was my first time beginning to blow the whistle, because then President Taylor would bring these massive South Asian companies. They will clear cut the forests and they will bring in timber for him to fuel the war in West Africa. So if you figure out, most of you have heard the thing, illegal timber, conflict timber, logs of war, conflict diamonds, blood diamonds. Those were the term of act that we developed in our advocacy work to draw attention, because sometimes you blew also different ways to your publications. When you target how a country is managing its natural resources, you develop a term of art to draw international attention. And those ideas draw attention to, for example, the timber being used to fuel war and conflict. Because has loss of war and conflict of war, set up an international system. Today, you've heard about the voluntary partnership agreements that the European countries set aside, ensuring that no timber is harvested that has come from an illegal source. So they have to set the whole standard for legality standards for timber. You've seen that. And I'm sure in the US itself, there are legislation that ensure that if forest products that are not sourced legally, there are US legislation that prohibits that. Then diamonds as well, because of our campaign around blood diamond, not just in Liberia, but in Sierra Leone, in Angola, we something called the Kimberley process that allow for a certification of diamond to make sure that diamonds would not contribute to conflict. But of course, we see diamond is really contributing to a huge conflict now across the globe. If you figure what's happening in Russia, which is one of the massive diamond sourcing country, and how diamond is feeding the Ukrainian crisis, you will clearly know that they need to blow a lot of whistle around those areas as well. So that's how we have started blowing the whistle on diamonds, on timber, on forests, and then eventually help to set up the Liberian Environmental Protection Agency and others. Yeah.
That's so cool. Do you think all environmental defenders are whistleblowers?
Absolutely. That's what they do for their job. To be able to protect the environment means you have to be able to blow whistle on the destruction that is occurring. If someone is polluting a river and you talk about the river being polluted, or you don't speak about that, you don't defend that river's integrity and sanctity, you're not blowing the whistle. But you blow the whistle to ensure that the river will continue to flow, right? We'll continue to be part of our web of life, part of our ecosystem. We know exactly what water means to us. But much more than that, you see an evolution in national and international laws now, making sure that we're not just protecting the rivers because we humans need to use it, but to also be able to recognize what we call legal personality or juridical personalities in bodies of waters, the way that rivers itself are supported and sustain life over time. Because we understand how essential that really is. So an environmental defender who draws attention to what river is being destroyed is a whistleblower. Environmental defender who raised the issues about the climate crisis, who sees that, like today, we are overwhelmed by the fossil fuel companies who are bent on doing everything to deny the science, who are bent on doing everything to ensure they will continue to pollute us, who will find every single nick and crack to make sure that they undermine global processes to ensure the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. To the extent that the sort of extreme that we now witness, extreme of heat, extreme of weather, extreme of forest fire, extreme of drought and disease and pestilence and migration. And in my own part of the world, how that is contributing to serious conflict. I've done work in West Africa, especially in the Sahel region. If you talk about Africa, you look at the Sahel region of Africa, Nigeria, Chad, Burkina Faso, Mali, where because of the climate crisis, the entire Chad basin is dwindling, and there's this scramble and intensity over resources. It's creating conflict between different communities. You have one situation where farmers are trying to protect their cropland and protect water. Other areas where herders, historically who have mined their cattle, are struggling over that. Those two communities have come together in clashes, and serious clashes where tens and thousands of people are dying and being slaughtered every single day. Environmental defenders are blowing their whistle on something like that, and are hoping that the world will pay attention. That is the impact of the climate crisis. So defenders have blown these whistles to draw attention. Why are we all talking about the climate crisis today? Because of the whistle blowing work of defenders. If they had not gone up to blow this whistle, we wouldn't know. So whether they are lawyers, whether they are scientists, whether they are youth activists, whether they are women-led processes, whether they are parents, moms and dads, whether they are indigenous people, collectively we are blowing this whistle to draw the attention. So on top of the national international agenda, there's a lot of conversation about what impact the climate crisis is facing. To the extent that the UN now say it is red coal, to the extent that everyone agreed that this is an emergency, we've got to find a way to respond to that. So yes, environmental defenders are the whistleblowers. In fact, they are the leading whistleblowers, because their whistleblowing is not just about picking the issues around them. It's about the planet and about the people. And that's why it's important to continue supporting them. So before make this distinction about, well, they are not really whistleblowers, these are environmental defenders. No. Because of their attempt to blow the whistle on the crimes that are occurring, and that's crime. When fossil fuel companies put up so much emission that now people are dying because of heat waves, crimes are being committed. So that's why the whistle is being blown as well.
It's just when you talk about this stuff, I get so excited, Alfred. I'm like, yeah. I can't stop shaking my head, yes, because you say it so well. Environmental defenders are whistleblowers. And I'm like, yes. But question for you. How does wildlife protection factor into environmental protection?
Well, I was also hoping you're going to say, in addition to environmental protection, how that also have implications for public health. But I will tell you that, right? So wildlife is an essential part of the world of life. I told you earlier on about my growing up as a kid, going to the mountains and focusing only on the dead wood, or going to the ocean and getting angry with my friends who were setting a snare to be able to extract the migratory birds. Now I know they were migratory birds. Those years I didn't know they were migratory birds. I just knew they existed and they came certain time during the dry season, because in our part of the world, we don't have the full sort of weather you have here, like winter and spring and autumn and summer. We have the rains and we have the dries. So during the dries, the ocean front is nice, and the tide is low, and these birds would come in. I didn't know where they were from. Now I know they were from Europe, right? So they were part of that wildlife. So we had to find a way to protect them. So, but also in the forest, there are many other species of chimpanzees and forest elephants and pygmy hippos, some of the species that I love a lot to be able to protect. They're linked to the sort of wildlife. But pushing across the world is reducing and dwindling wildlife population. Our desire, for example, for beauty, like the forest elephant that talks, or certain sort of things into the pangolins that people want to be able to buy, have their own kind of implication. But much more than that, habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation is causing serious problems. And there are implications for human rights and for the environment. Why is that so? Because first, when you destroy wildlife habitats, it's not just impacting the wildlife. Yes, it will have implications on species extinction, and we've seen in science how many species extinction have occurred, but that also have implications for how that will link to the climate processes. Because forests and wildlife habitat are an important cooling effect on the climate. When we talk about, when you feel warm and hot, you go into your home and you turn on the air conditioning. That's an artificial process. In our part of the world, when it's very hot, you go into the forest, you go under the shade of the tree, and the tree naturally turns on an air condition. That is what we call the biotic pump of nature. That's what forest is. That's what habitat is. That's how it becomes a haven for wildlife to preserve. So by destroying the habitat, by destroying the wildlife, by striking them from there, you destroy those relationships. So you can say, well, okay, I won't destroy the habitat. I will just remove the wildlife. Well, some of the wildlife activities contribute to the thriving of the habitat. They have to both coexist together. So it's important not to try to mess with that. And by removing that also, you allow for a lot more emission processes. So I'll give you one example. A recent study that have come from West Africa has shown that because of deforestation occurring in the West African region, right? Every year between November, December, January, and February, those who live in West Africa experience something called a harmattan. It is this massive blowing of hot air from across the Sahara Desert all the way over towards the ocean. What has happened over time is because of the habitat being intact, has that warm air has flown across the region towards the ocean. The intact forest, because of its biotic function through evapotranspiration, has been able to cool off that hot air, reduce the processes so that when it gets over the ocean, the amount of moisture it picks up diminishes. So it doesn't cause much problem. Over time, because of massive deforestation and destruction of habitat and this implication on wildlife, that hot air has now, it blows over the forest. And the ability to cool off that hot air reduces. It gets over the ocean, it picks up a lot of moisture. And guess where it dumps that moisture? Right here in the United States. So when you start having problems with all the hurricanes, all the floods, all of this, you have not imagined that that water is being picked up over West Africa because of the heat, absorb a lot of water and dump that. So blowing the whistle on wildlife destruction and its linked to habitat fragmentation and deforestation is important because it affects you. You see how in very remote areas across West Africa, because the habitat of wildlife is being destroyed to make way for the sort of stuff that got me into exile, like oil palm or soy and beef and cattle production that allow you to go in and have your cheap ice cream, your cheap cereal, your fast food, your nail polish, your lipsticks, your cream, your detergents that make all of these things here. Destroying that stuff have its own implications here. And this put many whistleblowers into trouble. And that's what got me into trouble. Because when I blew the whistle on the oil palm companies who are destroying that forest, to make sure that it will continue performing its natural functions so that you may not have the kind of intensity of hurricane it's now having here. Like 2 years ago in New York, that we saw happen there, and we're all shocked, how was this possible? Or now we see happening in Kentucky, where a huge deposit of water is dumped there. This is where the source comes from. So really supporting whistleblowers to continue doing this work, especially environmental whistleblowers who are focusing on maintaining natural habitats, ensuring that the system of web of life is maintained, protecting people on the planet is extremely important.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Alfred. I'm like, do you have time for one more question and then maybe a question for the audience?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, yay. So the question for you the last one for me is, what needs to happen today to improve protections, and what are you doing? What are your projects? Tell us about that.
Well, first and foremost, I'm hoping, because I didn't say this, right? Every single week, today is Friday, Siri. Today is Friday. This Friday, if you count the numbers, we have lost at a minimum, 4 5 defenders, 4 whistleblowers who were out there across the world, stopping the destruction I'm talking about, to ensure that the sort of inconveniences we face here in the United States, we didn't feel that. They've been killed. The data shows every single week, not less than 4 defenders are slaughtered. How is it possible for people who put their lives on the line for the planet and for all of us are being killed, and the leaders across the world look the other way and not paying attention to make sure that the perpetrators are hunted and held accountable? We have very great leaders who's been killed all over the place. Nothing's happening. I hope the world will pay attention, because our attempt to respond to the climate crisis will not be achieved if those who are our firewall, if those who are our first responders are not being protected, are not being secure, and are unable to do this work because people out there feel that they can make more money by killing them and slaughtering them. So to me, it's the first thing I think the world to pay attention, because these are the folks who are giving everything out so that you and myself can have a livable climate to survive in. So I think that's where it started. Concerning my project, there are many things I'm working on. So when I came to Northeastern, because of my privilege, and friends who brought me here, I felt that there were many other defenders, thousands of them across West Africa, who were not known, who are not heard of. And that's what happened to many whistleblowers. Siri, are you aware that there are millions and millions of whistleblowers across the world who don't even know that they are whistleblowers, who are doing the critical things of responding to the climate crisis?
Thank you for saying that, yes.
Millions and millions and millions who don't even call themselves whistleblowers, who don't even know they are whistleblowers. So I was involved in an assessment, a baseline assessment, to go in and identify those folks who are in remote towns and villages. And say, you guys are whistleblowers. What are your experiences? So we documented those experiences. And 3 weeks ago, we published a report. It's online. But much more than that, we realized, and I'm sure you will agree with me, Siri, that there is an acute under-reporting and documentation of whistleblowers, the harm they face, the reprisals they face, the attack they face, and how they've been murdered. They need to focus on that, to develop a system of documentation so we can document the work, the incredible work that these folks have done across the world, so people can see their value. So I've been involved in that process. But much more than that, whistleblowers need protection, legal protection, so that they don't face reprisals, so that they're not slaughtered the way I talk about. So I'm trying to figure out how we work with a team of lawyers to support those whistleblowers. But we also need strong legislations across the board, including treaties, international agreements to protect whistleblowers. So there's a common standard across the globe. So it doesn't look that, well, they are protected in the United States, but not protected in Russia, not protected in China, not protected in Liberia or in Ghana. So there's a common standard going across the world here and there. And then finally, this year, the climate change conference is going to Africa. It's going to be hosted by Egypt. Egypt is going to be the host. Well, let me tell you something. There are more than 60,000 whistleblowers in prison in Egypt. 60,000 whistleblowers in Egypt.
Wow.
Well,
wow.
They have responded in prison. And since the conference is going, many whistleblowers, most of them young people. And this is what I want to talk about. It is our children, the young people who have stood up and are blowing the whistle on the crime occurring across the globe. They've put their bodies, their life on the line for the mess that we adults have created to destroy this planet. Those kids are planning to go to Egypt. So we're trying to find out how to protect them. So now we are mobilizing resources to build the legal infrastructure before, so we educate them about what the Egyptians looked like, the do's and don'ts, during, so that we deploy lawyers, both Egyptian lawyers, but also international lawyers. And those who are on this call, if you look here, you are hearing my voice. We are looking for volunteers, eminent celebrity lawyers to go to protect folks so that we can figure out how to respond to the climate crisis. So this is some of the work I'm involved with to make sure that that occurred in Egypt. And then finally, along with a team of over 30 lawyers, we are working and researching a petition to be brought before the African court, so that the court is able to advise 54 African governments on their human rights obligation to respond to the climate crisis. Why is that so? Because Africa is the least emitter of greenhouse gas emission, but it is the most vulnerable. I just told you about the conflicts, the wars, the migrations, the drought, what's going on in the continent. So if they are the most vulnerable, and yet the least emitter, there's a need to build a whistle to protect Africa. So that's why this office is going to lead to.
That is incredible. That I'm just like, please send over links so we can tell people how they can get involved. If they want to volunteer, tell them how they can volunteer. This is incredible. I really would like NWC to get involved with the work you're doing. And this is just the first step in what I hope to be many conversations. You perfectly laid out the connection between wildlife, environmental protections, and how many whistleblowers are involved in the fight, and how incredibly important it is to protect them no matter where they are, because all together we are protecting this planet that we share. Is there anything, last words you want to say before we wrap up?
Well, I will say this, that the war is watching. And I'm also saying that we need to listen to nature. And I want to say that sometimes we question the science. People are like, oh, the science is not right. You know, centuries ago, it was the indigenous people who told us, don't take the oil from the soil. Don't cut down the trees. Don't destroy the wildlife. And what did we tell them? Those were the original whistleblowers, the indigenous people who told us that this is a Bandura box. We now see what the fossil fuel is doing to us. We didn't listen to them. How did we respond to that? First, we figured out that these were primitive people, these were savages, these were uncivilized people, and they had no place in life. We go, we annihilate and destroy and kill them all. Today, we are paying the consequences. You don't need the science to tell you that anymore. Just walk outside of your room. Walk in the street, see what's going on. In my own garden a few days ago, as I strolled with my daughter, we could see how the flowers were all being scorched. So my people, it is here. We are experiencing the climate crisis, and it is time. It is time to act. Don't feel that I'm alone. Don't feel depressed. Don't feel you're giving up. All of us need to mobilize and support whistleblowers. We all need to become a global community, a global army of whistleblowers. It is only when all of us are blowing the whistles and feel a sheer obligation to blow the whistle on the crime being committed against the planet is how we're going to solve this problem. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate you. I love you. Let's join this army of whistleblowers. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Alfred, and take care of your foot. Love you too. Thank you for showing up.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day, and we'll see everybody else tomorrow. We're starting at 2 p.m. with National Whistleblower Day and the story of whistleblowing.
Thank you.